What if I told you that before your first breath ever touched the air, before the first sound passed your lips, before you opened your eyes to the light of this world, there was already a story being written about you? What if I told you that there are unseen battles of war in the spiritual realm that began before humanity's first heartbeat, shaping destinies, guiding lives, and weaving together a tapestry no human hand could fully understand? And what if I told you this is not just about ancient people from ages past, but about us about you right now? Before we begin, if you've ever wondered about the mysteries of heaven, the battles raging in the world you cannot see, or what truly happened before the first breath of life was given to mankind, then you are not here by accident. Like this video, subscribe to Jesus Speaks, and comment 777 right now, because your voice, your understanding, your presence here is part of a generation chosen to seek truth beyond the surface. We are diving beyond history and into the deep waters of destiny. Now, come with me, let's step back thousands of years, under a burning Middle Eastern sun, into a land where every step was watched by the eyes of heaven. Our story begins not with a man, but with a prophecy. There was a woman named Rebecca. She had longed for a child, prayed for comfort, and finally God answered. But the miracle inside her womb was not gentle and peaceful, as she might have expected. From the first months, she felt an unexplainable battle deep within her, a violent twisting, as if the very souls inside were at war. Troubled, she did what many of us forget to do. In moments of confusion, she inquired of the Lord, and God spoke, not with a whisper of comfort, but with a revelation that would change history. 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. This was no simple pregnancy. This was the birthing of destiny, of conflict, and of a storyline that would ripple down through centuries. God was declaring that the struggle inside her was far bigger than sibling rivalry. It was about 2 nations, 2 spiritual lines, and the covenant purpose of God. When the day of birth came, the first of the twins emerged, a boy with hair so red and thick, his body looked like it was wrapped in a garment. They named him Esau. His name carried meaning: rough, hairy, wild. He was the hunter the wilderness would love. But behind him came another, hand grasping tightly around Esau's heel as though to pull him back, refusing to let him be the firstborn. This second child was named Jacob, the supplanter, the one who grasps the heel, the one who takes the place of another. Even from birth, Jacob was reaching, grasping, longing to get ahead. As they grew up, their differences became even sharper. Esau thrived in the open country. He was a skilled hunter, a man who smelled like the field, loved and favored by their father Isaac. Jacob was different, calm, observant, staying close to home. His mother Rebecca loved him deeply, perhaps remembering the prophecy and sensing that Jacob held a destiny even if his ways were not straightforward. But favoritism is like a slow poison in a family. Where there is unequal love, resentment grows like weeds. Underneath the laughter and daily meals, a dangerous seed was taking root, ready to sprout into deception, betrayal, and wounds that could last a lifetime. One day, Esau came in from the hunt, exhausted, sweat and dust clinging to him like armor after a battle. Jacob, in his quiet way, was waiting, cooking a simple stew of lentils. Esau asked for it, desperate for food. Jacob saw a momentan opening. "Sell me your birthright first," he said. This seems almost too casual, too sharp for such a sacred thing. The birthright wasn't just property, it was the inheritance of God's covenant. The double portion of blessing, the spiritual leadership of the family under the promise given to Abraham. Esau, driven by his hunger, answered recklessly, "What good is a birthright to me? I'm about to die." He swore an oath, traded the eternal for the temporary, the sacred for the immediate, and there it was. Jacob had taken the birthright not by force, but through cunning. The transaction was quiet, but heaven saw it. The angels recorded it, and the story moved forward into ever deeper shadows. Years passed. Isaac grew old and blind. The time came to give his blessing to the firstborn. He called Esau to hunt and prepare his favorite meal, so that he might bless him before he died. But Rebekah overheard. Remembering the prophecy, driven by her own plan, she told Jacob to disguise himself as Esau, wrapping his arms with goat skins, wearing Esau's clothes, and bringing food to Isaac. The deception was perfect. Isaac's hands felt the roughness of the goat hair. His nose caught Esau's familiar scent, but his ears hesitated. The voice is Jacob's. Still, he gave the blessing. "May God give you heaven's dew, and earth's richness, an abundance of grain, and new wine. May nations serve you, and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you." It was done. The blessing of the covenant had been spoken over Jacob. The promise of God was now resting on him. But blessings received through deception carry a cost. Esau returned too late, burning with shock, grief, and rage. His cry was bitter, echoing through the tent, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? He has taken my birthright, and now my blessing." And then came his vow, cold and sharp. "I will kill my brother." Rebekah, hearing this, sent Jacob away to her brother Laban's house, far in the land of Haran. Jacob left in haste. His journey had begun, but this was no pilgrimage of honor. This was an escape, a man running from the shadow of his own actions, alone. For the first time, the desert wind cold against his face. Jacob stopped one night, taking a stone for a pillow, and there, heaven opened. He saw a ladder stretching from earth to the highest skies, angels moving up and down, and at the top God himself. I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac, he said. I will give to you and your descendants the land on which you lie. Your offspring will be as the dust of the earth, and all peoples will be blessed through you. I am with you, and will watch over you wherever you go. It was overwhelming. This was grace beyond logic. Jacob, liar, schemer, fugitive, was chosen. God's promise had not been revoked, but reaffirmed. When Jacob awoke, his heart trembled. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. He set the stone upright, anointed it with oil, and named the place Bethel. And there he made a vow, not full surrender yet, but a step closer. If God will be with me and watch over me, the Lord will be my God. The deceiver was on the road to becoming a man touched by heaven, but destiny has a strange way of teaching its lessons. Jacob would now meet someone who could even him. His uncle Laban was waiting. When Jacob finally turned away from Bethel, the stone still gleaming faintly from the oil of his vow, his feet carried him toward the east, toward Haran, toward the household of his mother's brother, Laban. The land before him was vast, open, unyielding. And so was the future. Have you ever walked forward into a season not knowing exactly what waited for you, but feeling an invisible pull equal parts calling and consequence? That was Jacob. He had fled from Esau, not in dignity, but in desperation. His mother's plan had spared his life, but it had also removed him from every familiar comfort. The land of promise was now behind him. The road ahead was foreign, uncertain, and yet there were eyes on him. The same eyes that saw him wrestle for a birthright, the same eyes that looked down from the ladder at Bethel, were still watching. God's grace walks with us even when we are walking into the middle of consequences. Days later, Jacob arrived near the outskirts of Haran. There, by a well surrounded by fields and grazing sheep, he saw shepherds resting in the shade of the afternoon. Conversations carried in the wind, and among them a name rose like a familiar thread in a stranger's song. Laban, Jacob inquired, and the shepherds nodded toward the approaching figure of a young woman, her step sure, as she led her flock toward the well. Her beauty had the unadorned purity of sunlight reflecting on water. This was Rachel, Laban's daughter. If you believe in stories woven by a divine hand, then this moment was no accident. Jacob's heart quickened. He stepped forward, rolled the heavy stone away from the mouth of the well, and watered her flock himself. Their eyes met, and in that gaze something unspoken passed. Recognition, curiosity, perhaps even the first spark of something that God himself had already written in eternity's memory. When Rachel told her father of the stranger's arrival, Laban hurried to greet him, embracing him warmly. Family ties drew them together, but while Laban's arms were open, his mind was sharp, calculating. Jacob stayed, helping with the flocks, and in time, he made his heart's desire plain. He loved Rachel, and he would serve 7 years in exchange for her hand. 7 years. That is the measure of true longing, when love makes the days seem light, no matter the labor's weight. Scripture says those years seemed to him but a few days, because of the love he had for her. But when the 7th year ripened into the wedding day, joy overflowed. The feast was rich, the laughter full, the lamps flickered into the night. Jacob's anticipation burned bright, yet under the veil of darkness, deception crept in. When morning broke, Jacob's voice thundered through the house with disbelief and anger, for there beside him lay Leah, Rachel's older sister. The deceiver had been deceived. Laban's words were smooth, almost casual. In their country, the younger could not be given before the elder. Finish the week of Leah's bridal feast, he said, and Jacob could marry Rachel too, in exchange for another 7 years of service. So Jacob agreed. And just like that, his life shifted into a complexity he had never anticipated. One man, 2 wives, 2 rival hearts under one roof. Love was partial, affection was divided. Leah bore Jacob children while Rachel, though dearly loved, endured the emptiness of a barren womb for years. This became a household of silent tears and whispered prayers. Jealousy and sorrow often lingered like shadows in the corridors of their tents. Do you see what God was doing? The man who had secured his blessing through cunning now had to learn endurance in the face of another's cunning. The man who thought he could shape the future with clever hands now had to shape it. By waiting, the years in Laban's household were both fruitful and painful. Sons were born: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, and Joseph. They would one day be tribes. Now they were just boys running between the tents, unaware of the weight of history they carried. But Jacob's work for Laban was far from simple. His wages were changed again and again. Agreements dissolved like water through fingers. Yet God's favor rested on Jacob. The flocks multiplied under his care, and wealth grew despite Laban's schemes. By the time 2 decades had passed, Jacob was no longer the young man who had arrived by the well. Age and experience had worked their quiet transformation on him, but there was one unfinished chapter still calling him, the land of his fathers and the brother he had wronged. Then came the whisper from heaven, not a suggestion, but a command. Return to the land of your fathers and I will be with you. Leaving Haran was not a gentle parting. Jacob slipped away with his household and possessions while Laban was away shearing sheep, but word reached him, and Laban pursued. The confrontation might have turned violent if not for God's intervention in a dream, warning Laban not to harm Jacob. Their final covenant was marked by a stone pillar, a witness between them, and they parted ways. Yet Jacob's heart was not at rest. Messengers returned with news that Esau was coming, with 400 men to Jacob's ears. This sounded like vengeance approaching. The old fear returned, sharp as ever. He divided his household into two camps, thinking if one was struck, the other might survive. Then came one of the most honest prayers ever recorded. O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I fear him, that he will come and strike us down, mother and children alike. Notice it, Jacob, the man who once made plans in shadows without seeking God first, now bowed himself in humility before the Lord. Still, in true Jacob fashion, he sent gifts ahead, herd after herd, hoping to soften Esau's heart. Night, as the camp slept, Jacob found himself alone by the ford of the Jabbok. Every sound was amplified, the rush of water, the sigh of wind, through the reeds. Out of the dark, a figure came, no introduction, no request. Just force, sudden and unrelenting, grappling with him in the shadows. They wrestled through the night, dust, sweat, breathless gasps, neither yielding, but as dawn began to paint the edges of the sky, the stranger touched Jacob's hip, and pain seared through him. The joint was dislocated in an instant. Still, Jacob clung. I will not let you go unless you bless me. What is your name? The stranger asked. And here was the moment. Years earlier, when his father Isaac had asked him that question, he'd lead, I am Esau. But in this holy moment, there was no disguise. No pretense. Jacob, he said. Then came the transformation. Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with man, and have prevailed. When the figure blessed him and departed, Jacob named the place Pen, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life was spared. The sun rose on a limping man, broken, yet blessed. Israel walked toward his brother that morning, the limp a reminder that some victories leave you marked. As Esau approached, with his men, Jacob's family watched anxiously. Jacob stepped ahead of them all, bowing to the ground 7 times as he came near. This was not the proud young man who had taken Esau's birthright and blessing. This was a humbled patriarch, offering himself to his brother's mercy. And then, the miracle, Esau ran to meet him, not with sword but with open arms. They embraced, and tears washed away 20 years of fear. Jacob said to him, to see your face is like seeing the face of God. Now that you have received me favorably, God had gone before him. The heart he feared was already softened. The reunion was not without caution. Jacob still chose his own route rather than following Esau's. But in that moment, there was peace. The wound between brothers had been touched by the hand of heaven. It is here, in the space between Peniel's night wrestling and Esau's embracing arms, that we see the deep truth. Blessing doesn't come from taking, but from holding on to God and not letting go until he gives it. And restoration can happen in places where fear once convinced us it was impossible. Years had passed since the morning Jacob limped away from the fort of Jabbok, since the tearful embrace of the brother he once feared would kill him. The land of Canaan stretched before him, its hills and valleys holding the echoes of Abraham's footsteps and Isaac's prayers. Jacob, now Israel, had returned not as the single fugitive who fled with nothing but his staff, but as the father of a great household, with wives, children, servants, and the wealth God had blessed him with. Despite every hardship, but the blessings of God do not erase the complexities of life. Often, they deepen them. Israel's camp was full of life, the braying of livestock, the calls of shepherds, the footsteps of children weaving between tents. Yet even in the midst of plenty, seeds of conflict began to grow, not from outside, enemies, but from within. Of all his children, Jacob's heart held a special tenderness for one, Joseph, the son of his old age, the firstborn of Rachel, the wife for whom he had labored 14 long years. When Jacob looked at Joseph, he saw not just a son, he saw the love story that had carried him through valleys and betrayal, through the crushing disappointment of marrying Leah first, and the years of waiting for Rachel's womb to open. Joseph was a reminder that some dreams, though delayed, are not denied. Perhaps it was this deep attachment that blinded Jacob to the effect of his favoritism. He gave to Joseph what he had never given to his other sons, a richly ornamented robe, woven with colors that caught the light of the sun and drew every gaze. In the fields, it stood out like a banner. At home, it whispered a truth the other brothers could not ignore. Father loves him most. Jealousy is a dangerous river. At first, it trickles in quiet thoughts, but given time, it cuts deep ravines into the heart. Joseph's dreams only deepened the divide. He told his brothers of sheaves, of wheat bowing to his own, of the sun, moon, and 11 stars kneeling before him. In Joseph's young mind, these were simply visions from God. In his brothers' hearts, they were insults carved into pride. The day came when opportunity and resentment met. Far from home, in the fields of Dothan, Joseph approached his brothers. Wearing the robe that had become the symbol of their father's unequal love, the plot formed quickly, first to kill him, then, at Reuben's urging, only to strip him of his robe and throw him into a pit. A caravan passed, merchants bound for Egypt, and Judah's voice cut through the tension. What will we gain? If we kill our brother, let's sell him instead. Silver changed hands. And Joseph, bound and bewildered, was led away toward a destiny none of them could yet see. The brothers dipped the coat in goat's blood and carried it home. Jacob's cry, when he saw it, was the kind that does not fade with days or years. It was the cry of a father whose heart had been pierced beyond repair. Surely I will go down to the grave mourning for my son, he wept, and from that day a shadow fell over him. In the years that followed, life went on. The seasons turned, the flocks bred and grew. Children became adults, but grief became Jacob's silent companion. At night, when campfires burned low, he would lift his eyes to the stars and remember Joseph's boyish smile, his eager steps, his dreams. He did not know that those dreams had not died in the dust of Dothan. They had only been transplanted to Egypt, where God was weaving a salvation story in palaces and prison cells. Famine has a way of exposing what lies beneath the surface of a man's strength. When the rain ceased, and the soil cracked beneath the sun's relentless gaze, the abundance even in Israel's household began to dwindle. News came of grain in Egypt, but to Jacob, Egypt was nothing more than a name, a distant land that had swallowed up his beloved son. Still, hunger leaves little room for sentiment. 10 of his sons he sent, keeping Benjamin, Rachel's second son, close under his watch. The thought of losing Benjamin was unbearable. Days turned 2 weeks before they returned, and their words came in fragments that made no sense at first. A stern governor, accusations of espionage, Simeon held as a prisoner, and worst of all, a demand. If they were to return for more grain, they must bring Benjamin with them. Jacob's voice cracked under the weight of the demand. You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. Everything is against me. It was only when the grain was gone, and Judah stepped forward with a solemn vow to protect Benjamin with his life, that Jacob finally relented. With trembling hands, he blessed his sons with a prayer. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. Here is a mystery of God's ways. The very path Jacob feared would destroy him was the path that would restore what he thought was lost forever. When the brothers returned from Egypt the second time, they came not in despair, but in awe. Was abundance. There was Simeon, and there was news. Impossible news. Joseph was alive. The words at first struck Jacob like the babbling of dreamers. Joseph is still alive. He is ruler of all Egypt. But when he saw the wagons Joseph had sent, laden with gifts, hope that long-buried seed broke through the crusted soil of grief. I am convinced. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. And so, the man who had once wrestled with God beneath the stars set out again. This time not as a fugitive, but as a father seeking the embrace he had thought impossible. Yet before he crossed into Egypt, God met him in a vision at Beer. Jacob, Jacob, do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I myself will go with you, and I will surely bring you back again. Fear melted into faith, and Israel journeyed on. The reunion in Egypt was the kind that words can only brush against, never fully hold. When Joseph saw his father in the distance, chariots thundered across the plain. The son who had once been a boy in a robe of many colors now wore the linen of Egyptian royalty, but in his father's arms, he was only Joseph again. They wept, long and without shame. Years of separation, nights of wandering, prayers offered in darkness, all answered in that embrace. For the rest of his days, Jacob lived under Joseph's protection in the land of Goshen. 17 years of peace, 17 years to watch grandchildren grow, to tell them the stories of Abraham and Isaac, to teach them that the God who calls is the God who keeps. But the end came, as it must for all. Jacob called his sons to him, blessing each one, speaking over them words that were part prophecy, part father's heart. Over Judah, he spoke of a ruler's scepter that would not depart. Over Joseph, a blessing of fruitfulness and strength. And when all was said, he drew his feet into the bed and breathed his last. They carried him back to the land of promise, to bury him with Abraham and Isaac, a final act of faith that the covenant of God was still alive. Jacob's story had begun with grasping hands and a name that spoke of cunning. It ended with open hands blessing a nation that would carry his new name, Israel, into history. It is the testimony of a life that stumbled, wrestled, wept, and finally leaned wholly on the God who had been there all along. And the story is still not finished, because the God of Israel is still writing in the lives of those who, like Jacob, dare to hold on to him through the night until the blessing comes. The years in Egypt were unlike anything Jacob, now Israel, could have imagined when he first fled into the wilderness as a young man. 17 years of peace, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, watching them grow under the steady shelter of Joseph's influence. There were no famines here, no hostile neighbors, no restless nights watching the horizon for danger. Yet even in the land of plenty, Jacob's eyes often looked beyond Egypt, toward Canaan, toward the land promised, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to him. He knew Egypt was not their home, only a chapter in a much greater story. Age had slowed his steps and bent his frame, but his mind was still sharp. One day, a familiar stirring in his spirit told him the time was nearing. The time to gather his sons, not just to say farewell, but to release words that would shape their destinies. In the tent thick with heat and the weight of years, the 12 sons stood or knelt in a semicircle. Their faces bore the furrows of men who had lived much, warriors, shepherds, wanderers, storyholders. Each carried his own history with his father. Some carried guilt, some carried pride. All came knowing this moment was holy. Jacob's voice, though weathered, carried the authority of one who had walked with God through both fire and blessing. Yet what he gave was not simply the blessing of a father's hand, it was prophecy. His words reached far beyond the lifespan of his children, stretching into centuries to come. He began with Reuben, his firstborn, the one who by birth should have been the greatest, but who had forfeited strength through uncontrolled passion. "You are my firstborn, my might. Turbulent as the waters, you will no longer excel." Reuben's head bowed. The truth was as sharp as it was unchangeable. Leadership requires discipline, and he had surrendered it. Next came Simeon and Levi, bound together by both blood and the violence of Shechem. Cursed be their anger, so fierce, I will scatter them in Israel. And indeed, history would scatter them. Simeon swallowed up among the other tribes. Levi without territory of his own, but preserved as the priestly order. Their anger redeemed into service at the altar. Then Jacob's tone shifted as he turned to Judah. No rebuke here, but a steady voice of promise. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come. His brothers glanced at one another. The implication was weighty. A ruler would come from Judah's line, not just a king, but the king, the Messiah. Judah, the one who had once plotted Joseph's sale, was now marked by God for a royal destiny. Grace had rewritten his story. Zebulun would dwell toward the sea, Issachar would bear burdens, Dan would bring justice, Gad would overcome raiders, Asher would yield rich food, Naphtali would be swift and free. Then Jacob's gaze rested on Joseph, his beloved. Joseph is a fruitful vine. With bitterness, archers attacked him, but his bow remained steady because the mighty one of Jacob shepherded him, because of the Almighty who blesses you. It was a blessing wrapped in gratitude. Joseph had been betrayed, yet preserved, wounded, yet exalted. His life was living proof that what is meant for evil, God can use for good. Over Benjamin, the youngest, he spoke of a wolf who tears in the morning and divides spoil at night, fierce, quick, and unyielding. Each word Jacob spoke was both a mirror and a map reflecting who they were and hinting at who they would become. Though the sons might not have seen it clearly, time would prove every syllable true. Tribes would rise, kings would reign, prophecies would unfold across centuries, all seated here in the breath of an old man whose life had been one long encounter with the living God. When the last blessing was spoken, silence filled the tent. Jacob had no more to say, no more to take, no more to give. He drew a final breath of Egypt's warm air and whispered his last request, that he be buried not here, but in the cave of Machpelah with Abraham and Sarah, with Isaac and Rebekah, in the land of promise, that it was an act of faith to the very end. Egypt held safety, but Canaan held covenant. His body belonged in the soil of God's promise. And then, as scripture says, he gathered his feet into the bed, and was gathered to his people. Joseph wept openly at his father's side. The fullness of their final years together could not erase the ache of loss. In an Egyptian procession of honor unmatched for a shepherd from Canaan, Jacob's body was carried back to the land where his story had first been written. Horsemen, mourners, Egyptian, and Hebrew alike, moved as one across the desert until they reached the cave. There they laid him down beside his fathers. Israel's breath had stilled, but Israel, the nation, was still breathing. 12 tribes carried his name now. A promise older than Jacob's own heartbeat was marching forward, but the story did not pause with Jacob's burial. In the days that followed, something unspoken rose among the brothers. Fear without Jacob. Would Joseph finally take revenge for the pit, for the betrayal, for the years of slavery? They came to him with words rehearsed in unease, speaking of their father's supposed dying wish that Joseph forgive them. The air between them must have felt thick, heavy with remembered guilt. Joseph's eyes filled, but not with the hardness they feared. He had long since released the debt. His voice broke through the tension. Do not be afraid. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. It was the heartbeat of redemption, the truth that what passes through human hands bent toward evil can be caught and reshaped by the hands of a God whose purposes cannot be undone. Joseph comforted them, speaking kindly, providing for them and their children. The cycle of deception and retaliation that had shadowed Jacob's early life ended here, not with another act of cunning, but with forgiveness. Jacob's blessings had been more than farewell words. They were declarations that God's hand was on a people still in their forming, and that his promises reached beyond one generation. They pointed forward to kings and leaders, to wars and triumphs, to exile and restoration, and ultimately to the one who would hold the true scepter in his hand, Jesus, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. For now, the family lived on in Egypt under Joseph's protection. But there would come a day when a new Pharaoh would forget Joseph, and the cry of a nation in bondage would rise to heaven. Jacob's body rested in Canaan. His faith rested in the unchanging word of the God who had found him on a lonely night, with only a stone for a pillow and a ladder stretching toward heaven. And that same God was still at work, guiding, shaping, preparing. Because the God of Jacob is never finished with his people. The days after Jacob's burial in the cave of Machpelah were filled with both silence and change. In Egypt, life continued. The river Nile rose and fell in its faithful seasons. Grain swelled in the fields of Goshen, and the children of Israel multiplied. Joseph held steady in his role, his wisdom still respected in Pharaoh's court. Under his care, his father's household, now a full clan of tribes, lived in peace. There was food in abundance, pasture for their flocks, and none of the famine's shadow that had once driven them to Egypt. But time is a river that never widens for comfort. Seasons pass, rulers change, and the memory of gratitude can fade faster than morning mist. Israel's children grew in number, families became clans, clans became tribes. The campfires at night glowed like a small constellation scattered across the fertile delta. Egyptian neighbors watched, first with curiosity, then with quiet concern, that at first they were guests. But over time, guests can be seen as strangers, and strangers as threats. Joseph lived long enough to see great-grandchildren placed upon his knee, their laughter filling the courtyards like a song from another homeland. Yet even he knew that the favor they enjoyed would not last forever. Before his death, he gathered his brothers and their children, speaking words that reached beyond his own lifetime. I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land, to the land promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And when he does, carry my bones from here. It was a seed of faith planted in hearts that had only known Egypt. Joseph's bones would rest above ground for generations, a silent witness to the promise that Egypt was not their forever home. When Joseph's eyes finally closed and his body was embalmed in the Egyptian way, the generation who had known Jacob and the covenant firsthand began to fade from the earth. And then, quietly, history turned a page. A new Pharaoh arose, one who did not know Joseph. He saw not the wisdom that had spared Egypt, nor the loyalty of a people who had settled in peace. He saw only numbers, strength, multiplication. And in his mind, multiplication meant danger. Fear is a seed the enemy loves to water. It blossomed quickly in Pharaoh's court. If war breaks out, he reasoned aloud to his advisors, these people may join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. And so, the slow tightening began, a subtle shift from welcome to control. Taskmasters appeared, their whips curling through the air over Hebrew shoulders. Fields that had once given freely, now demanded labor for the sake of Pharaoh's building projects. Store cities rising on the backs of weary Israelites. Yet the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. It was as if God himself was answering Pharaoh's fear with a living, breathing reminder that his promise to Abraham, I will make you into a great nation, could not be strangled by chains or crushed by bricks. Still, cruelty deepened. Orders were given that every Hebrew boy born should be thrown into the Nile. This was more than population control. It was an assault on destiny. It was an attempt to cut off prophets and warriors before they even took their first breath. And yet in the shadows of this cruel command, God was moving. The covenant given to Jacob was still alive, and the very acts meant to destroy Israel were setting the stage for their deliverance. Among the crying infants and terrified mothers, one child would be hidden in a basket of reeds, set gently upon the same Nile meant for his death. He would float into the court of Pharaoh himself, destined to be the instrument through which God would answer centuries of groaning. But that is the next chapter in God's grand design. For now, the tribes of Israel, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Gad, Asher, Dan, Naphtali, Joseph's sons Ephraim and Manasseh and Benjamin were learning the weight of life away from the land of promise. They were tasting, for the first time, the bitter pairing of blessing and bondage, perhaps around their fires at night. Elders still told the stories of Abraham leaving Ur, of Isaac's wells, of Jacob wrestling an angel under the stars. They would speak of God's ladder stretching into heaven, of the scepter promised to Judah, of Joseph's rise from pit to palace, and perhaps the children, eyes wide, would ask, if God promised us the land, why are we here? Why do the Egyptians rule over us? The elders might sigh, look into the flames, and answer, his time is not our time, but he is faithful, he will remember. In the silence between those words and their fulfillment, God was shaping a nation. Slavery would teach them dependence. Oppression would birth in them a longing for freedom so fierce that when the deliverer came, they would follow him into the wilderness with only his word to guide them. Yes, Egypt was not the end. It was the womb in which the nation of Israel would be formed. That is a mystery of God's ways, that the seasons when we feel farthest from his promise may be the very seasons he is preparing us for its fulfillment. Jacob had learned that lesson in his own life through exile, wrestling, and reconciliation. Now his descendants were learning it in the long, slow crucible of oppression. But for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had not forgotten. The covenant was an unbreakable thread, stretching from patriarch to patriarch, from generation to generation. No Pharaoh's decree, no years of hardship, no chains of iron could sever it. It is here, at the close of this section of the story, that we stand. At a threshold, the era of the patriarchs fading into memory, the cry for deliverance beginning to swell in the throats of a people ready for God to act. The bones of Joseph still waited, the promise of Jacob still lived, and somewhere in the land of Egypt, the cry of a newborn spared from the Nile marked the beginning of freedom's dawn. The sands of Egypt shifted through the years, marking the passing of generations. The voices that had once told stories of Abraham's call and Isaac's wells grew quieter, replaced by new ones, still speaking the name of the God of Israel, but with more questions than answers. Jacob's body rested in the cave of Machpelah beside Abraham and Isaac, but his name lived on like a banner over his descendants. The 12 tribes, the living branches from his life, now pulsed with the strength of a growing nation. Every field worked, every child born, every memory of Canaan, whispered into the dark, was part of the unfolding covenant. And yet, the days of open favor were fading. A Pharaoh rose who did not remember Joseph's wisdom or Jacob's pilgrimage. Suspicion replaced gratitude. Chains replaced welcome. The people multiplied under a sky that now seemed closed. It might have looked, to the natural eye, as though God had stepped away. But the God of Jacob does not forget. His promises do not rust in the passing of centuries. Where man sees confinement, heaven often sees preparation. Jacob's story was proof of that. Think of him, the young man clutching his brother's heel, trying to secure in his own strength what God had already spoken. The exile sleeping on a stone under the stars, seeing heaven open. The shepherd laboring under Laban's tricks, learning the strange glory of God's faithfulness. The father limping toward the brother he feared. The old patriarch, eyes dim but spirit alive, blessing sons who would become tribes. Jacob's life had not been a straight line of victories. It was a series of altars built in the wilderness, vows made with trembling hands, prayers whispered in fear, and moments of surrender where God proved stronger than his striving. And now, what God began in Jacob would be carried forward by a people who bore his name, Israel. But here's where the story turns into ours. Because when we speak of the God of Jacob, we are not just reciting a historical title. We are invoking a God who meets the striver, the wanderer, the wounded, and the worn, and still calls them chosen. Do you remember the blessing Jacob pronounced over Judah? The scepter shall not depart from Judah. That ancient thread ran through the rise of kings and wars, through David's harp and Solomon's temple, through exile and return, all the way to Bethlehem, where a baby's cry shattered the night. The Messiah, Jesus, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. This means Jacob's life is not sealed in the pages of Genesis. It is still echoing every time someone kneels at the cross. The same God who wrestled with Jacob by the river still wrestles with hearts today, not to destroy them, but to rename them, to mark them with a limp that reminds them they are held by grace, not by their own grip. And maybe that is your place in the story. Maybe you have been like Jacob, running from your past, convinced the person you deceived, the mistake you made, the path you wandered down will one day rise to destroy you. Yet, as with Jacob and Esau, God goes before you. He softens hearts you thought were stone. He prepares tables where you expected judgment. Or maybe you are still in the Laban years, working, waiting, enduring unfairness. You cannot yet see how God is multiplying your flocks, your influence, your faith beneath the surface. Or perhaps you stand in the Egypt years, feeling far from the promise, in a land that does not yet feel like home, watching God's people suffer and wondering where he is. Jacob's story whispers, hold on, the God who called you is still writing. When we look back at Jacob's life, we don't just see a man, we see a mirror. We see the danger of striving without trust, the wounds caused by favoritism and deceit, the long shadow that guilt can cast. But we also see that God does not discard the flawed. He transforms them, he renames them by the end. Jacob was not remembered only for his schemes, but for his faith. Faith strong enough to insist on being buried in the land of promise, even when that promise seemed an ocean away. Faith to bless his sons not just with wishes, but with prophetic sight into what God had planned for them. Faith that the God of Abraham and Isaac was, and forever would be, the God of Israel. End. Here's the mystery. That same covenant promise, it has stretched unbroken through millennia. It reached from Jacob's tent to Moses' staff, from David's throne to Mary's womb, from an empty tomb to the present hour. You and I live under the testimony of a promise that began the moment God told Jacob, I am with you, and I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. So, As we close this journey, imagine the scene one final time. An old man leaning on his staff, eyes shining with a memory no one else can see. The ladder, the angels, the voice of God in a barren night. He knows his story was never just about a man becoming a father of tribes. It was about a God who refuses to let go, even when we try to run. That is the God of Jacob. That is the God who walks into your wilderness, your exile, your Egypt, and says, I will be with you. And if that truth has stirred something deep within you, then take a moment. Like Jacob at Bethel, set up your own altar in your heart tonight. Mark this moment. Call this place God's house, because he met you here in the telling of an old story that is really still your story. Hold fast to him. Wrestle if you must, but don't let go until he blesses you. And when the blessing comes,